Welcome everybody to our next episode of The Window Seat, and a big welcome to our guest today. He's a man that truly needs no introduction, but I'm going to give you one anyways. Our guest today has been, and correct me if I'm wrong, has been a flight instructor, a charter pilot. He spent nearly 10 years in the flight department of one of the largest global corporations, Walmart, and served as chief pilot there, aviation director for most of your time there. You've been involved with the Canadian Business Aviation Association, I guess from an official capacity since 2014, and has served as president and CEO of the organization since August of 2018. And on top of all of that, you've managed to squeak out an MBA in between there as well. So kudos to you. No small feat. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest today is Anthony Norejko. Thanks for joining us, Anthony.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate the opportunity. You got it. Thank you.
Making sure I didn't miss anything there. You've probably got a full calendar of calls today, so thank you very much for taking the time to join us and to speak a little bit about the state of the business aviation industry in Canada today. So I know you're busy, so let's jump right in. My first question to you is, in your opinion, what or how has the Canadian business aviation sector been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic?
So I think there's kind of the experience runs a wide range, and I think it's important to think of it in three phases. The first phase is sort of that initial news, rewind the tape, if you will, in your mind to around that late February, early March, the topic that everyone's hearing about COVID. Some countries are taking some action. And I think if you think of that first phase, what I would highlight is that our operators, one, were continuing with their business, and we call that essential flying, commerce and trade. What we were starting to see is repatriation flights. A lot of our charter management companies in business aviation were getting calls to repatriate Canadians from points all across the globe. And of course, there were various efficiencies that were realized by using business aviation, by being very targeted about getting the right number of people from the right location with experienced crews that fly within our sector. The second phase is sort of what I would call a holding pattern. So think of this as where regulations have come out, governments have said, okay, we're sealing down the borders, we're preventing air travel, things like this. This holding pattern comes out, and again, we still have some essential flights. Again, this is related to commerce and trade. And there are some repatriation flights still, as if you remember from the tape, there were still some Canadians that were left out in other areas. And again, that's happening. But overall, I really would characterize this second phase as a holding pattern. So some operators were saying, okay, well, listen, we're going to really scale back our operation because their business or their principles had said, listen, that's the right thing and it fits where they are as a business. And I think that's really the best way to characterize that second phase. But the third phase is where we are now, which is provinces in Canada are starting to open up. Right. We've got still states in the United States that are opening up. And of course, as a Canadian operator and a Canadian business, very often your traffic, the flow between our countries is north and south.
No question.
So where we are today is that I would suggest we've got a pent-up demand. We've got folks, businesses that are queuing, if you will, with pent-up demand to get that travel going. So I think that what I'm most proud about in representing business aviation is being able to share the story about how we came together, especially on that repatriation element. I mean, we know that our primary function as that time machine, as that in service to our businesses, we get that, and that's our day-to-day. But I think what I'm most proud about in this phase, about how we've responded to the pandemic, is how we were able to play a part in getting Canadians home and getting Canadian supplies, whether it's our first responders, medical professionals, getting PPE to those folks. I mean, we have great stories of our members flying across the country. So on balance, it's a pretty wide range. But I think if you think of it in those three phases and where we are today, I think it's been a great response by this industry.
You make a really interesting point, the side of business aviation that most of people never see or never think of. And I'll get into that in a second. Now, as far as affecting the industry, how has this pandemic affected the CBAA, the Canadian Business Aviation Association? Your work as an association, how have you been affected by this?
Well, it's funny, of course.
Other than working triple the hours, of course.
And that's kind of the funny sort of story to look at is that while our members and our industry have scaled back a little bit of their flying, certainly, the association itself has, I would argue, never been busier. I mean, we've got a great team of folks at the association. Our primary activities have been really centered around influencing government and our regulator. So thinking of those two buckets, on the first, one of the things I'm most proud of is working with our national associations. So we managed to pull together 13 other associations across this country. So in total, 14 associations took a letter campaign to the Prime Minister. I think the challenge that we've had with the government today is that they want to take a one-size-fits-all approach to a response. And we know that, if you take a step back and think, aviation was the first industry impacted by COVID. It'll likely be the last to recover. Mm-hmm. And we've got an approach where currently the federal government is saying, let's just try to find a one-size-fits-all. And if that was the case, we'd all be wearing the same size hat and the same size pants. And we know that doesn't work. And so on the government side of things, that's taken up a lot of time and energy. Our regulator, I have been pleased with under Nick, the leadership of Transport Canada. They have listened to some of the changes that we've proposed, not just us, but other associations. So our time has been spent really about building coalitions with associations, mm-hmm. influencing government, influencing regulator on behalf of our industry. And I take to our mission pretty serious, where we're here to promote and simplify business aviation. And it's the simplification part that we're really trying to push. Everything from one element I think we'll have when we start to think about coming back is how we can help our operators get flying both safely and so that we can start to get the Canadian economy moving again. So we're really looking with those two areas, government and the regulator, and trying to influence the way they think about our response, the government's response to this pandemic.
Challenging jobs on a good day, right?
Exactly.
Now, speaking about changes, how your association or our association, on our behalf, you put on an annual general meeting and an annual convention that brings together all of its members, its OEM members, operators. What does that look like in the future? I know this year's event has been postponed a calendar year, but when we come back, does it look like it looked like last summer, or are we going to see some changes?
Look, I think that that on balance, I do believe that there'll be some level of familiarity with those conventions, and whether that's us at the association or even broadly speaking, the way we publicly gather, there's got to be some sort of course correction in terms of people's level of comfort. But I think on balance, we will slowly get to a place where gatherings will return, and that extends to our association and the convention. Of course, we're going to have an AGM hosted electronically, which is the flavor these days. So that's
I just registered. So.
Perfect. So there's always the point of connection, and I think the work you're doing with this podcast, with this time, it's connecting people, connecting the ideas that help us move forward. So I think there's going to be more influence on this kind of interaction, this kind of electronic means. But if anything, there'll be a demand to meet together. I mean, people want to collaborate. People want to see old connections, establish new ones, all of that. So I think we will get back to that. I mean, we are hosting with our Sky Service partner in Toronto again in 2021. So it'll be a big year, and we're looking forward to it. But as we sit today in May, as we're recording this, there's still quite a lot of challenges. And that's just not on our side with the convention, but just thinking across North America and the globe. Course correcting that thinking is going to be, I think, the next opportunity.
And like you said, a lot unknown that you just don't know. You wake up each morning and you're not sure how a regulation or a travel restriction may be changing from what it was yesterday. So there's only so much you can plan in advance at this point, I suppose.
Exactly.
Speaking about business aviation and all the good that you mentioned that our industry has been doing during this pandemic, can you speak a little bit about maybe the side of our industry that is not often spoken about in the media? It generally gets characterized in one fashion to the general public, but what are some of the things about business aviation that maybe the average person doesn't realize?
So I think what's interesting, and I'll answer it in the way both, because I think the conversation around the pandemic will feed this response. So let's think about the future of travel and how that ties together with business aviation, because I can unpack all of these sort of together. So what we've become accustomed to with commercial travel, let's think about schedule, frequency, the routes, the destinations, the airport experience, all of that. All of that has changed. And I think it's going to take quite a long time before, even if we want to get to what we call the old normal, I don't know that that's going to happen.
Right.
So you think about what's going to come. You know, business aviation is designed really as this time machine to serve that purpose of affording safe, reliable, and efficient transportation. So when you think of safety in the context of the pandemic, I'm not talking about accidents and all that stuff. I'm just talking right now about the idea that as we go forward from
health of passengers.
Exactly.
Yeah. Here
now you've got an opportunity to control the participants that you're flying with, right? If you're a corporation, an individual, whoever it is that you're using these aircraft, from a safety aspect, you can control that. When you talk about reliability, well, there is going to be, like right now, as we sit here today recording this conversation, you still can't fly to the United States with the country's largest carrier because of their self-imposed business restrictions. So in terms of reliability, I mean, at what point do we think that the commercial flights are going to return to any level of normal service? So business aviation from a reliability standpoint will allow folks to get around where they need to go. I mean, one of the things that we always kind of talk about that never gets appreciated is our ability to use not just the major airports in Canada, but all of the secondary airports, the smaller communities. So now you'll be able to still continue to those locations, and folks will start to realize that they can go when and where they want with a level of comfort, and that reliability will be issue. So the last, I think, is that efficiency element. And I think there's a story here, both in terms of cost, because I think about when our airline partners are talking about socially distancing, let's say the middle row or whatever that looks like. The problem is, think about the profitability. So think about how they as a business are going to succeed. I think the low-cost carriers, that stuff's going to be a real stretch, because profitability on those seats is a challenge. By taking seats out, this is like an existential crisis to the airline. So in terms of cost, I think we're going to see airfares increase. And when you do the right job of how you select your business aircraft, you can control those costs in a very, very smart way, and it can influence the costs that you undertake for your travel. So when you think about efficiency, there's an element of cost, and I think an area that doesn't get a lot of appreciation is on the environment. So when you think of one of the benefits of business aviation, of course, and having the latest technology, on balance, our industry tends to have a younger fleet than, say, our airline counterparts. I mean, the airline counterparts, they'll operate, especially for the low-cost carriers, they'll operate old legacy aircraft they've had around. Maybe they brought them out from the desert, et cetera. But our industry takes advantage of, I mean, everything from, you know, the latest design. So think about composite technology. It was business aviation that really drove that. Think about winglets. Think about engine design. We have the manufacturers in Canada that make these things. But our industry, on balance, supports the technology that affords us these efficiency wins. So when I think about the environment, I think you asked the question about what's something that not a lot of people know about our industry. And I think the story to tell there is that, you know, on the environment, it's an issue certainly that we pay attention to, and that our operators are always looking for gains there. But I think it's important to share that, you know, people are entitled to their opinions, but what they're not is the facts. And I think it's important to share the facts of the environment. And aviation globally is 2% of the emissions. That's similar to what actually scientists estimate it basically costs to run all of the internet, the servers, the power, all that, 2%. Right. Now, business aviation is but a fraction of that 2%, because that 2% is globally. It's everything. It's airlines, it's low-cost carriers, et cetera.
Sure.
So imagine solving, the way I like to frame this is sort of saying, well, if we're about a fraction of that 2%, maybe the way to think about it is that, imagine you've got a $1 problem. What would throwing 1 penny at that problem do? So we are desiring the latest in technology. By extension, that gives us efficiency wins, both in terms of fuel consumption, all of that. We get cost benefits out of that as well. But then you go back and saying, because we're such a low contributor, business aviation, I think that's the hidden fact, is that we are still very green and we continue to aspire to higher levels. I mean, we've asked publicly for the government to fund sustainable aviation fuels. So for a whole host of reasons, I think that's kind of where I would add the point about an unknown that should be known of business aviation and of our industry on balance, especially as we start to navigate our way out of this pandemic.
Anthony, your insight, as always, is very eye-opening and very interesting. And if people want to find out a little bit more about business aviation in Canada or what your association does, where can they find that?
So on our website, of course, you can find us. I mean, any Google search will take you there. Of course, we're very active on Twitter and LinkedIn. And we've got for our members, an email. I think that's important to them, especially as we've come out of COVID, emailing membersupport@cbaa.ca will connect you with our team, and we're happy to look after any of the concerns that come out and any questions that come out of this chat.
Again, Anthony, I appreciate your time. You've got me all energized and ready to get back on the telephones here. So thanks for carving out a piece of your day for us, and look forward to seeing you in person sometime soon.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
Thank you for watching, and make sure to tune into the next episode as we sit down with Ray Kuliavas from Levaero and discuss all things aircraft sales during the COVID-19 pandemic. See you soon.